Hi, everyone. Today, me and Tete are going to be talking about her return to Andrei's story. For the last 5 or 6 months, she has been focusing on Gerda and Kai, which is her fantasy story. But recently, she has suddenly experienced a surge of inspiration for her story about Andrei, and she is now returning to his story and changing a lot of things in his story. So, today, in this podcast episode, we're going to be talking about how and why she has made the changes she has and how she has gained her inspiration back for Andre's story.
So hello there. Hello there. Thank you so much. It's been an amazing journey. Um, and it just sort of came out of nowhere, really. I would have to say I'm not really sure what exactly prompted it. I believe it was a conversation we were having, and then we had I believe one of our audio role plays, which is now up in on the podcast now. And I think that prompted me to go back to Andre, and I was just craving for the confidence and boldness that he embodies and radiates.
Mm-hmm. I think you said that it might be a seasonal thing. During winter, you feel like you want more comfort, which Kai and Gerda give you. But with Andre, you feel like he kind of represents spring and summer because he represents a kind of masculine energy.
Definitely, definitely. Andre definitely brings that masculine energy, and that's often associated with the robust nature of spring and summer. I mean, even the ancient people often equated that with, kind of masculinity. So I do believe it is a seasonal thing. I think with Gerda and Kai, you're more prone to feel them in fall and winter, which ironically, they both kind of represent as sort of like these semi-deities. And Andre himself, he's not a man you would associate with snow or ice. I mean, he's very much a robust man on the, sprawling green steppe, or at least semi-green steppe when it's not dry in the summer.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So what kind of changes have you made to Andre's story since we were talking about the novella you did of him last year, 70 Fierce Years?
Well, I think there's been a number of changes. I think one of the most major changes is perhaps with Andre's love life itself. The character of Dasha just felt very stilted. She felt very one-dimensional. Um, she did not seem to have anything beyond merely being a support for him. And Andre's dedication to her, because we know that Andre is a man who loves too much, maybe not always well, but he loves in excess. It just doesn't seem to justify that, because I think in order to inspire that kind of devotion in Andre, you have to, deliver something in equal. It has to be a reciprocal of, I think, in Andre's view.
That makes
Um,
sense. Mm-hmm.
so we removed, so Dasha is no longer, she's gone.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think one of the problems you said that you had with Dasha was that she was extremely passive and extremely hard to communicate with as a character. She was just very quiet and she didn't really have any specific characteristics. She was just there, as a remnant of Andre's past, but how does he build a life with her based on just the memory of the past?
Exactly, exactly. And this also shows a character shift in Andre as well about how the previous novel was situated. I think the main goal of Andre is to adapt and grow. And even if he is facing a strange new alien world that feels hostile to him, he wants to adapt and, hopefully thrive in it, because I think he's less selfish in this respect. And I think that someone like Dasha simply would not be able to sustain what he's going through, what he needs, and also maybe more importantly, what he can give now. So I don't think Andre can, really cling on to remnants of the past. I think he can mourn the loss thereof and mourn the potential of what could have been, had he been able, to retain things like, rank and property, and,
Mm.
the freedom to, do things like, breed horses and things. Um, and also maybe possibly, being involved in a sovereign nation state, which is why he was very adamant about this counter revolution the Don Cossack specifically had. Um, but he can lament that, but I don't think he needs to dwell on it or cling on to it or let him hold him back from the potential that he can do in this new world now.
Hmm. I think it's more realistic and less idealistic because as we've seen in, the past more than 10 years that you've been working with Andre and his previous reiterations like Jusha, one of the issues you had with him was that you were always afraid to make him more flawed, I think. You were always kind of trying to impose certain ideals onto him. And now I think he's stripped of that idealism. He is just a person. There's no need to put him on a pedestal or make him kind of like a moralistic character.
Definitely, definitely. There's no need for him to embody any kind of ideals. He is simply a man, a real man with shortcomings, with flaws. And I believe all these shortcomings and flaws, I think they make it all the more endearing for him because it shows that he's human and it shows how he's working to overcome those. But also his flaws can actually help him out because I sometimes think the more I live, the more I realize maybe flaws and shortcomings are a coping or survival mechanism that we have in life with all its difficulties.
Exactly. I think it makes Andre a much more compelling character and less of a person who just feels like a mouthpiece for what you want or what you think is proper in life.
Very much so, very much so. And I think that can be a problem when people have characters that they become that. And I never really wanted to do that with Andre. It just happened because I myself, I guess you could say, was kind of like sort of, how do I say, I had loved this character so much, whom I consider as a real person, that I was sort of having kind of a motherly bias, like, oh, he can't do no wrong, that sort of thing. But now I've learned to let go of that, and it's just so much more liberating now, and just
Hmm.
letting him do his own thing.
I agree. So now that Dasha is gone, who is she replaced with?
Well, we have two figures, main figures. Andre now experiences quite a tumultuous love life, which we'll get into in just a moment. But the two main characters that sort of superimpose as central figures in Andre's love life are first Tamara, and then that's followed by Elena.
Hmm.
And these are two women who are very integral in his life, especially at certain periods of his life where he's at a certain growth and at a certain crossroads, if you will. Um, and of course, I think it's safe to say that given Andre's amorous nature, that he would probably have at least several or more passing romances. Maybe they only last a month or the month, the season of spring or summer, but he's had a few, short-lived, spring romances.
Hmm. I think that really fits him a lot better, especially since, he is someone who doesn't really have a lot of reticence when it comes to amorous adventures.
No, no, he doesn't. He's quite an escapade man when it comes to amore.
I think he's the opposite of his ancestor Gleb.
He is. Gleb was really didn't want to, think or deal with romance. Also, that was kind of a foreign concept to Gleb in the world he grew up in. I mean, Gleb has learned to appreciate and love someone, but that was just a very hard thing, and it's certainly not the way that Andre does.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes, a Gleb comes from a much tougher world, and I think it's more foreign to us since it was so long time ago.
It definitely is. It's and I think that's why the approach for Gleb will be a more surreal style. I don't think it's going to be 100% right on the dot nose accurate with everything. Because number two, we don't have a lot of sources for that kind of lifestyle back then, you know.
Exactly. And if we delve too deeply into the non-historical research parts, like the day-to-day life stuff, it could be more difficult, ironically, than writing about war or something that is well documented.
Exactly, exactly. So, with Gleb, his story might be a lot shorter. I think it's going to be more of more of a panel, if you will, of different, major events in his life that he kind of reminisces over.
Mm-hmm.
And and also maybe just show kind of the establishment of the family, farm homestead and everything, and how this whole family, got themselves established during the late 1700s. And then it kind of makes it all the more poignant when you think that Andre is the last one, and it dies with
Mm-hmm.
him.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah.
Back to the RP, because I think the RP was kind of the starting point for a lot of these new developments with Andre. Can you tell us a little bit about how, you think the RP influenced this new development in Andre?
Well, I think the RPs, I think the ones where he's in the Lower East Side, which is an alternate universe, I think it made me realize more of Andre's amorous nature. I think it made me realize that he has a lot of shortcomings. He's very short-tempered. He's not necessarily vulgar, but he's very, very brazen, and he can be very foul-mouthed, and kind of quick to, if he's dealing with aggressive men, I mean, his instant solution is, I'll just, punch this guy in the face. We don't have any verbal negotiation in this house.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Very
Yeah.
true.
And I think with the other RPs, such as the Katya one, I believe that it was quite an eye opener. And I think it was the most helpful of all, because it brought a very, very profound change, which I will drop as a bombshell right now on the audience. In this official version, what I have discovered about Andre is that he's always been in the military. So after the whole thing failed with the counter revolution, and after serving a stint in prison, and once he gets out, he goes back into the new Red Army military, and he thrives in it. He not quickly, but he gradually builds himself through the ranks. And Andre just can't leave the military. Without it, he doesn't feel like there's any structure or identity. And given his, boisterous personality, maybe not boisterous, but, given the fact that he is kind of rough, short-tempered, very combative in nature, I think, and belligerent, I don't think there's anywhere else that would fit him than the military. I don't think he could fit into civilian life, which demands a more civil, restrained, which isn't to say that the military does it, but I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Andre's outbursts can be more tolerated in the military, in fact, kind of encouraged, given the ferocity of a lot of things that happen in the military.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that I noticed was that I think Andre thrives in an environment that has more structure. Before, the idea where you had Andre taking on little jobs and trying to survive, in the after he got released from prison with Dasha and the family, it felt like there was no structure.
Exactly. There was no structure. Andre's the sort of person, he craves structure. He doesn't necessarily crave the structure of beat, which, to the audience, we probably explained it before, but beat is kind of a concept that's kind of formalized in the Russian language as home life or domestic life, which, that could encompass a lot of different definitions, but mostly like home life and things like that, like wife, kids, the whole 90 drill. Um, but Andre doesn't necessarily want that or think he's suited to it. But what he does like is structure. This is what he enjoyed as a Cossack. There was an identity and a structure to that identity. Then
Mhm.
that's stripped away. So he's trying to find a replacement for it, or maybe not a replacement, just to sort of build himself new. So he goes into the Red Army, and one might think it's kind of ironic that he goes to, serve the very people or the very side that were his enemies. But I think you have to realize it was very complicated, because many of the people in this area were, like friends and neighbors, and now they're on another side, which a lot of people just didn't have any choice. You just go with it because it's just big, it's there, you can't fight it, even though you tried to. So
Mhm.
you might as well join. If you can't beat them, join them, which is like the perfect encapsulation of it all. Can't beat them, join them. And I think Andre has it's kind of a hard process for him, but he does overcome, I think, a lot of difficulties, and he's able
Mm-hmm.
to reconcile and move on and thrive in it.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a much better way to explore his story. It gives you more structure as well as more structure for Andre. I think it's good because before you were struggling to find out what kind of things he would do when he was taking on the small jobs.
Very much so, because his education and his talents, they're just not suited for factory or civilian life. They're not. I mean, Andre pretty much only knows military lifestyle, military things. It's a little bit different now because they don't have horses or, any kind of emphasis on cavalry now. But the whole military structure and everything, he knows it very well, so he can just jump right into it with very, very little training. It's just probably just new words, new ranks, new uniforms, and maybe just a new format of structure, but the structure's still the same. It's kind of like the house is built on the same blueprint, just the materials are different.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
natural. And you know what? As we talked about in our private conversations, I think the more closely you adhere to the role play between Katya and Andre, the better it flows, your inspiration for Andre's story.
It does. It does. I mean, even pulling out characters that have arrived from the role play. We also have we have some new characters, including revived Evsei, which we'll get into, and we also have a new character who's very very vibrant and integral, Kirka, also known as Kirill, and we'll be talking about him soon. But the more we go with the role play, the more inspiration it brings, and the more it's not really an alternate universe. I think the only difference about the role play, is that Andrei's not with Elena, he's with Katya, and I don't think he's going to be with Tamara. I mean, maybe that's something we can, work out, maybe, because not sure how Katya would react to the past things with Tamara, which we'll get into. Um, but that's about it. And of course, he doesn't know Lara.
Mhm.
Lara, the eccentric, flamboyant professor. So those are the only things that are different. Everything else has remained the same essentially. But the role play has been, I think the role plays, and you know what? Ironically, it was these role plays that brought Andre into the 20th century.
Definitely. Because before he was pretty much Gleb, right? Because you
Pretty
separated
much.
him into two characters.
Exactly, exactly. And it was nice to finally know Andre as he really was, which he was 20th century dude.
hmm I really think the role play brought him to life even back in 2016.
It really did. I mean, even the 2016, as strange and unusual as it was, folks, it was brilliant, and it gave so much structure and foundation. It's pretty much what was the incunabulum, if you will, for Andre as he is now.
Yes, definitely. How do you think Katya inspired him to develop more as a character? Do you think she also inspired your decision to remove Dasha from canon and put in Elena?
Yes. 1,000 times yes, as I go running into the sun. Yes, yes, yes. Katya inspired so much of Andre. The chemistry is so palpable. I mean, it's in the air. It's in the air like a fantastic spring mist. And it was just nice to get rid of Dasha. That's very cruel of me to say so, but I did not like Dasha, and I don't think anyone liked Dasha either. I couldn't even draw her. So, it's bad when I can't bring myself to draw, someone. It was nice to get rid of Dasha, because this Andre does not need a woman to love like that. Doesn't really love him in return. Maybe, it was just sort of like a structure, a device, not even a structure, merely a device. But with Katya and Andre, there is this palpable chemistry. There is this wonderful confluence. There is this bonding that takes place. There's this instant met, crossroad thing. I mean,
hmm
even meeting at the train station and just, on the way to Moscow, they instantly become friends. I mean, it feels a little bit odd that they blend together so well, especially given that, Katya is very quiet and thoughtful, while Andre's very, kind of loud and belligerent, I think, as you were probably seeing in a novelette that I'm going to be releasing soon. Um,
Yes.
But I think Katya inspires Andrei to do better, and I think this is sort of what inspired me for Elena, which you had helped develop, and I think also partly Tamara as well. Um, but Katya does, I think, bring out the best in Andrei. I think she brings a certain cheerfulness and innocence, a certain kindness that has, been long buried. Which isn't to say that he's not kind. He can be. As we'll learn, he's very protective of his men, especially the younger ones that he's training. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, but Katya's just been the best thing for Andrei in the world. She definitely has, and I dearly love the role plays. If we could just continue doing it for years on ad Adam, I would.
Well, we are going to be releasing it on Tapas,
Definitely.
along with the new novelette that you're working on that's based on the RP.
Exactly, exactly. That's what we're going to be sharing that, folks. And um you'll be seeing the RPs, you'll also be seeing the novelette. Um and I hope that you guys will enjoy it and everything.
It's really great.
Yeah. Yeah.
hmm
Yeah, I'm really excited with all these developments. Andre has so much more potential now, and there's a lot of things he can do now.
That's true. Exactly. Can you go into a little bit more detail of how Elena was inspired by Katya?
Yes, it was a discussion that you and I had had. We were sort of racking our brains. Now, there's always been a few guidelines that have been with me with Andre for many years. He's let me know when I haven't been an idiot, not listen to him and go through all the nonsense that I've gone through all these years. I've always known these few guidelines. One is that he has dark hair, dark brows. He's sort of swarthy, if you will. He's well muscled. He's very tall, and he's been able to experience a happy marriage, and he has at least 3 kids. So there's always been those guidelines that he's had that. But finding out who this particular wife was, or wives we should say, because we're going to get into that, um, is a bit of a difficulty. So I mean, those have always been, and of course his bad temper and his proclivity to punch people rather than verbally negotiate things. So
hmm
those have always been guidelines for him. But I think when you and I were discussing, we were sort of looking about what made Katya work so perfectly with Andre, and what were the strengths of that bond. What were the characteristics that she had brought that blended so well with Andre's personality and everything. And I think we started to develop Yelena. I was pretty much stuck in a puddle, but you began to figure out what's similar, but what else, also what's different, because this is obviously going to be in a different situation. And, Andre may be dealing with, a different thing that he is doing, even if he is in the military.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And Yelena, Yelena is playful, she is bright and cheerful, but at the same time, she's different from Katya, in the fact that Yelena's more mechanical minded, whereas Katya enjoys allegory and kind of understanding people. I think Yelena is more about getting things done and finding solutions. And Yelena is also pretty passionate about agriculture and, animal, like veterinary type of thing. So she's really, really passionate about that. And she wants to see things like the farms and such succeed, especially since that's kind of an integral part to survival, particularly in the South, which is very agrarian.
hmm
So she does differ from Katya in that respect. You know, but there are some similarities. It's just more or less like a thing of personality per se.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Can you tell
yeah.
us more about how Elena will meet Andre?
Yes, yes, I will. So this is and we will get on to the other character tomorrow after we've established Yelena here in a second. So Andre and Yelena meet in very different circumstances. Whereas Andre had met Katya at a train station near Moscow because he had to go for medical treatment, um, Andrei has not been sent up north. He's still in the south. But Andrei has now been tasked, like many people had been, with sort of starting and establishing collective farms. This was sort of a radical way to hopefully bolster and increase agricultural production. Of course, as we've seen, wasn't we don't need to go into the details. I think we all have to crack open a history book and sort of cringe a bit, but sometimes you do survive and you do make it through the year. But but anyway, Andrei, like a lot of other servicemen, were tasked with, organizing and establishing collective farms, or at least, helping people establish or work through these collective farms, because it was kind of a radical new way to farm. Everyone had been just
Mm-hmm.
used to like the, old days of everyone just had their little plot of land and did their own little thing. So Andrei has to do that. And on top of that, Andrei has to learn a lot about mechanical stuff, which he's not very good at. He's trying his best, but um, he still struggles to put together a combine. Like, I mean, he might just look at the instructions and put it together backwards or something.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where he meets Yelena. Yelena is very proactive on this particular collective farm that he's been assigned to. And she's kind of scared of him. He just seems like, a big grumpy gruff thing, and she's like, oh, scary, big scary army man, but the more she's around him, the more she realizes that, he has his kind, gentle side to him. And the most important thing too is that he understands, the people. It's not just like they just transplanted someone from somewhere else and then they don't know the people, they don't know how to talk or think like them. And Andrei does, because he's a son of the steppe, if you will. And
Mm-hmm.
and so this impresses Yelena. um Yelena and Andrei form a friendship, but I think Andrei's scared because he's had some past failures, and also I think Andrei still hasn't been able to overcome a lot of things, like like a lot of PTSD, which he doesn't know what it is, because I mean, people really hadn't known what it was. Like, people knew that something like that was there, but they didn't know what the term was or how to treat it, or even if it is something that is reasonably there, that
Mm-hmm.
does it exist. So Andrei's still struggling with that, and Andrei is afraid to love Yelena, and I think he wants her to, have more options, like, to go do her own thing with education and agriculture and stuff like that, and really thrive, in the new society. Um, Even if there will be a lot of shortcomings or difficulties, he doesn't want to have her tied down to, the beat, because he's worried. And also, you have to remember, at that time, that was kind of dissolving too. There was no more the traditional domestic household or anything. It was
Exactly.
more
Mm-hmm.
radical, not radical, but like, it was very different. Like, people were working, doing their own things, and kids were going to school. So people were no longer constrained, by that kind of suffocating environment that a lot of people found themselves in with, traditionalism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, I think eventually they do overcome their difficulties, and they do decide to get married. And Andrei has a child with her, and that's his youngest child, Mishatka, short for Mihail.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes a lot of, there's a lot of convoluted, not convoluted, but it's a difficult process for Andrei, because Yelena has, how do I say, inspired him to new growth that he hasn't had before. um it's a bit like the depths that he didn't think he had, because he thought, well, I dug as deep as I could go, which he really had. um but you know and I think also on that fact too, trying to see how I can word this. I think Yelena kind of helps him let go of a lot of complexes and difficulties he has, especially like with doubting himself or thinking himself worse than he really is, because there's a lot of men far, far more worse than Andrei, far more worse. And I think it's a brilliant blossoming between the two. And I guess you could kind of see it as, maybe an analogy or an allegory of how they're trying to do things with, the fields and the earth and stuff. They're trying to make something grow, and it kind of reflects in their own relationship and everything.
I think it's wonderful. I think this is a much better fit than Dasha ever was.
Oh, by far, mon ami, by far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So maybe like, do you think in the next episodes we will be talking about characters like Evsei and the others? I guess you can call them the side characters.
Side characters. I think we can. I did want to kind of go into the fact that Andre has some personal history, and I wasn't sure if the audience would like to also learn about Tamara.
I think we could definitely. Do you think we can talk about her in this episode, or should we save her for a future episode?
I feel I feel like we could easily, work with her, like maybe briefly touch upon her, and then maybe in another episode go deeper into
Mm-hmm.
her and Yelena and how they contrast and compare to one another.
That's a good idea because she is
Yeah.
still pretty new.
She is very new. She pretty much came out of the idea that, you know, one of the things I've always gotten from Andre is that he has had a previous marriage and that he's, lost his spouse. So, it's been one of those things where he's had one marriage and then he goes into
Mm-hmm.
another one. But, Tamara's kind of interesting because I was thinking about when Andre gets out of prison, he's in an extraordinarily vulnerable state. And, you know, he needs, if you will, some sort of resemblance of reality, because it's so hard when you're traumatized by not only war but prison as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Tamara comes at a very, very significant and pivotal time. And how do I say, she's rather unusual in the respect that, so basically, to kind of encapsulate it, Andre, when he was in the counter revolution, one of the men that was closest to him was a younger officer named Kirka, which long name we'll explain later. But Kirka was actually a counter spy or a double spy, if you will, for the Reds, who was kind of looking to undermine all this stuff. And unfortunately, much to Kirka's chagrin, he ended up very much valuing Andre and forming a deep friendship, which made his betrayal of Andre hurt all the more. So Kirka was very determined to get Andre out of prison and sort of get him on back track to a normal life. So as soon as Kirka can get him out of prison and Andre's released, Kirka knows he can't be there to take care of Andre. Andre's also physically a mess as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Kirka hires this woman who is coincidentally a prostitute, and her name is Tamara, and she's had kind of a tumultuous life. Um, it's sort of rumored, how what happened was that she came from a very traditional Georgian family, and then something had happened between her and a man, and her family had thrown her out. And in desperation, she turned to prostitution to keep herself surviving. And now she's picked up this very odd job to take care of Andre. And Kirka's also thinking, maybe once Andre gets better, he might want some of that.
Mm-hmm.
And but uh, the relationship between Andre and Tamara, it's very sweet, very poignant, and I think it was perfect for the time where they were. When they were both at a very vulnerable, broken state of life and just trying to piece together a foundation so they can move on in this new world. And, Andre, he doesn't have a traditional domestic life, and neither does she, because he does encourage her to go out and do stuff. Um, so they do decide to get married. It's nothing real official. It's more like I just went to the courthouse and signed some papers. So it's more like a common law type of thing, which probably in that new state and everything, there wasn't a big emphasis on those sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, they had two children. They had Matka, also known as Matvi, and they also had Pelusia, whom Andre named after his aunt. So they had a boy and a girl. Unfortunately, Tamara had a lot of health problems, and I'm not sure exactly what had happened with her, but apparently her with the childbirth really did a number on her health. And unfortunately, she passed away um, when Matvey was 4, I think, and Pelusia was 2. And I think she was very scared about dying because she was very happy with Andre and her 2 kids. But as painful as it was for Andre, I think Andre was very determined to make sure that he can take care of the kids. Like, yes, he's away most of the time with military stuff, but I think he was able to make arrangements so the kids were taken care of. The only problem is her death was such a profound impact on him that he never quite recovered for it. And even though he did have maybe a few fleeting romances here and there, I think he was afraid to truly love and commit because I think the pain of losing Tamara was too much. And he does begin to question if, maybe he could have done something to prevent her death, or if her, kind of putting in her, her union fate with him had caused her demise and things. Because he does blame her. He does blame himself for her death because he wonders, well, maybe if we hadn't had children, would she have been healthier? um, you know, and things like that. He has a lot of questions that torment him. And this is kind of like what's the roadblock between him and Yelena. But I think it shows that Tamara was at a point in his life that he needed someone like Tamara,
Mm-hmm.
and that helped him on the path to grow. And now with Yelena, it's showing him how to expand higher and deeper, if you will, into new horizons of growth.
Mm-hmm. I see. Wow, that was really amazing. You've really done a lot of research and a lot of thinking about these characters, and I can't wait to learn more about Tamara and Elena. These two women will add so much to Andre's life, and they are definitely an improvement over Dasha.
Definitely, definitely. And initially, I was kind of worried about Tamara since she does unfortunately pass away. But it's one of those things where it happens in life. Sometimes you lose loved ones, unfortunately. So I'm very satisfied with the developments, and I'm glad Andre was finally able to open up after I stopped
Mm-hmm.
being blinded by my own ideals.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. Next time we will be definitely talking about the other characters like Evsei, Elena, and and
Kirka,
definitely Kirka and
Tamara.
Tamara. Yes, sorry. Thank you so much again, Tete.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.